The sky trembles. Sirens slice through the early morning like invisible blades. Windows shatter. The ground vibrates beneath the bare feet of a child who doesn't understand why the night is lit like day. On the horizon, columns of fire rise, devouring entire neighborhoods. A mother pulls her son by the arm. A man runs carrying a suitcase that no longer matters. The air smells of smoke, hot metal, and fear. The noise doesn't stop. Engines roar above the clouds. Bombs fall. The silence between one explosion and the next is worse than the blast. It lasts only seconds, but it feels eternal. In underground shelters, people huddle in the dark, praying, trembling, waiting for the next detonation not to have their address. Somewhere, a soldier looks at his dirt-covered hands and realizes he is digging not a trench, but a boundary between life and the end. How did the world get here? It was World War II, the largest armed conflict humanity had ever witnessed. A war that crossed continents, swallowed oceans, mobilized empires, and turned cities into ashes. It was not merely a dispute over territory. It was a profound rupture in the very idea of civilization. More than 60 million lives would be lost. Entire peoples would be displaced. Technology would advance at a brutal pace, not to save but to destroy with industrial efficiency. The 20th century would be permanently marked by this abyss. But there is a detail we often forget. For many countries, the 1920s had been a period of euphoria. Major European capitals glittered with electric light and jazz. New York rose in skyscrapers. Berlin thrived as a vibrant center of art and science. Industry expanded. Mass production promised prosperity. Radio connected households. Cinema created stars. Even after the crisis of 1929, there was still a belief that the system could adjust, that the treaties signed after the First World War would guarantee stability, that the worst had already passed. But beneath the surface, something was fermenting. The humiliation imposed on Germany by the Treaty of Versailles had left deep scars. Devastating inflation eroded economies and dignity alike. Unemployment created a resentful generation. Amid collective frustration, radical speeches found fertile ground. Europe was a web of fragile alliances and tense borders. Colonial empires maintained trade routes that crossed the globe. Ships carried goods, soldiers, ideas. The world was more interconnected than ever. That same interconnectedness that fueled prosperity would also amplify conflict. In East Asia, Japan expanded its influence, driven by imperial ambition and scarcity of resources. In Europe, the rise of authoritarian leaders promised order, national pride, and restored greatness. Crowds applauded fiery speeches. Flags were raised. Anthems echoed across crowded squares. The origin of the new catastrophe was not a single gunshot, but a combination of resentment, economic crisis, and extremist ideologies. At first, it was invisible. A gradual movement of radicalization, the normalization of the unacceptable. Then came the breaking point. On September 1st, 1939, German troops crossed the Polish border. Tanks advanced like steel blades across fields still wet with morning dew. Aircraft bombed cities. The strategy was swift, coordinated, devastating. Blitzkrieg, lightning war. 2 days later, the United Kingdom and France declared war on Germany. A local conflict became a world war. From there, the spread was vertiginous. Poland fell. Denmark and Norway were occupied. France, considered one of the greatest military powers of the time, succumbed within weeks. Paris was taken. The continent seemed to bend before the German advance. In the skies over London, during the Battle of Britain, aircraft dueled in clouds of smoke. Cities were bombed night after night. Civilians became targets. Fear became routine. Meanwhile, in the East, Germany invaded the Soviet Union. Millions of soldiers crossed frozen borders. The war became a machine of brutal attrition. Stalingrad became a symbol of resistance and carnage. Streets turned into battlefields. Buildings collapsed over exhausted men. In the Pacific, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor drew the United States into the conflict. The world was officially in flames. Human reactions were varied. Governments mobilized entire economies for war. Factories stopped producing consumer goods and began manufacturing weapons, tanks, aircraft. Women filled positions once reserved for men. Rationing became a common word. But there were also errors and illusions. Many leaders believed concessions would appease expansionist regimes. Others underestimated their adversaries' capacity for resistance. Propaganda shaped perceptions. Truth became a weapon. And then came the deepest moral collapse. The Nazi regime implemented a systematic policy of extermination. Jews, Roma, people with disabilities, political opponents, and other groups were persecuted, deported, murdered. Concentration and extermination camps became part of an industrial machinery of death. Trains arrived overcrowded. Families were separated. Names became numbers. The horror was not accidental. It was planned. In many occupied regions, laws ceased to protect. Neighbors grew suspicious of one another. Anonymous denunciations became common. Survival often required silence. Desperation fueled radicalization. Minorities were turned into scapegoats. Violence was justified as historical necessity. Fanaticism replaced dialogue. And devastation was not limited to great capitals. In the countryside, harvests were abandoned. Entire villages vanished under occupation or battle. Roads became refugee routes. Millions walked with what they could carry, fleeing advancing fronts like storms. Nature slowly reclaimed spaces where towns once stood. Empty houses rotted. Burned silos became skeletal silhouettes against the sky. The war seemed endless. But gradually the tide began to turn. In the east, the German advance was halted and then pushed back by the Red Army. In the west, D-Day marked the Allied landing in Normandy. Soldiers crossed beaches under intense fire, opening the path for the liberation of France. Cities were retaken one by one. Germany was heavily bombed. Berlin became the final stage of resistance. In April 1945, the Nazi regime collapsed. Shortly after, Germany surrendered. In the Pacific, the war persisted. Brutal battles on remote islands showed the conflict would still demand a high price. Then in August 1945, 2 atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. A flash, a shockwave, a new era. Japan surrendered days later. The tragedy receded not as glorious victory, but as absolute exhaustion. Cities lay in ruins. Infrastructure was destroyed. Millions were dead. Millions displaced. The world that emerged from the rubble was not the same. Europe lost its position as the uncontested center of global power. The United States and the Soviet Union emerged as superpowers, inaugurating the Cold War. New international institutions were created, such as the United Nations, in an attempt to prevent another similar collapse. Economies were rebuilt. Aid plans financed reconstruction. Borders were redrawn. The political map changed. Colonies began independence movements. But the scars remained. Survivors carried memories that could not be contained in words. Generations grew up in the shadow of ruins and stories of loss. Nuclear technology became both a promise of energy and a threat of annihilation. World War II redefined concepts of human rights, international responsibility, and the limits of state power. It also revealed how far human beings can go when extremist ideologies meet absolute power. Today, we live in a world equally interconnected. Global economies depend on one another. Information travels in seconds. Local crises can quickly gain global proportions. The past is not just distant memory, it is a warning. The question that echoes is not only how the war began, but how entire societies accepted gradual steps toward the abyss. How hateful rhetoric became state policy. How fear was turned into a tool. Have we learned enough? Or do we simply believe we are too different to repeat the same mistakes? The history of World War II is not only about battles and treaties, it is about human choices, about responsibility, about the fragility of civilization when values are slowly eroded. To look at that period is to confront the worst and the best of humanity, to recognize courage and barbarity, sacrifice and cruelty. Because understanding the past is not an exercise in nostalgia, it is a necessity. I am only a voice crossing the echoes of history, and as long as there are ruins to remember, we will keep returning to them, not to relive the horror, but to illuminate the path ahead. The next era awaits us.